and watching this, so it's going to be recorded. And I wanted to point out before I get started that everything I'm going to be saying today is documented in this on a web page. So this is the FredHetch.io website, and if you just go to resources and then click on the Inkscape tutorial, then everything I'm going to say today is up there. So you shouldn't have to take too many notes or follow along or anything. It's just all here. And I should also say that all the resources, all the sort of example documents and things like that I'm going to be using are available here. So this is a GitHub page, and if you just click on clone or download and then download zip, you can get a zip file with all of the little example files that I'm going to be using. So, yeah, so I've been using Inkscape for about over a decade, and that means I'm quite familiar with it, which is good for you, but it's also bad for you because I've forgotten which parts are tricky. So you guys, if I do something and you say, oh, that went by a little fast, please do ask me. The other thing before we get started is I really recommend doing graphics with a mouse, like an actual external mouse. This is about the most boring mouse you can get, but it's important to have 2 buttons on the mouse, and I like to have a scrolly wheel too. So those things are useful for when you're editing graphics. So let's see.
For a Mac, does the equivalent of a scrolly wheel and 2 buttons seem to work?
I mean, I have used a scrolly wheel and 2-button mouse with a Mac with good success. I do think you can, with these fancy mice, you can, you put your finger where the scrolly wheel would be, and it would work. Okay, so before we talk about Inkscape, we sort of need to talk about SVGs. So Inkscape makes SVGs. So SVG is a file format called Scalable Vector Graphics. So I'll just start by saying a little bit about SVGs. So it's called SVG because it's scalable, which means that we can zoom in and not lose any resolution. So if you're familiar with like PDFs, like you can zoom into a PDF and it doesn't look ugly. But if you zoom in into a JPEG, eventually you're gonna hit a pixel, and then it's gonna look like a big pixelated lattice. So Inkscape makes the first kind of thing. It makes a scalable vector graphic. So SVGs is a sort of standard format. And so you can open it in a modern web browser. So if you have like IE10 or Firefox or Chrome, you can open your SVG, and here we can see that we're zooming in and we're not losing any resolution. And that's because the SVG actually instructs what is going on. It's not saying this pixel is black and this pixel is white. It's saying there's a line here, and it has a certain thickness, and it has a certain starting point and a certain ending point. So to drive this point home, we can actually go to our, we can go to the file browser and just open an SVG. So SVGs are actually text. So here we are. I'm just opening an SVG in a text editor, and it really is just a bunch of words. And we can see, for instance, down here at the bottom, there's something that says more tacos, please. So let's just open this in our, this is the recording software, which is being rather annoying. We can open this SVG, and it says more tacos, please. So now we can go over to our text editor and say, okay, we don't want more tacos, we want more kindness. And then we just save that. Okay, now when we reload, it now says more kindness. So we just went into a text editor, modified our SVG file, and it reflects in what the image looks like. Any questions about that? So SVG is a file format, it's scalable, and it's text-based, and it's sort of a public thing. It's not something that's owned by a company.
So you couldn't go just change it right here, highlight tacos?
Not in the browser, so that's where Inkscape comes in. So Inkscape is the browser is not designed for editing SVG files. It shows SVG files, but Inkscape is designed for editing SVG files. Well, yeah, I guess so. So you can copy, but no paste, because we can't edit. Okay. So, yeah, and a lot of things make SVG. Your plotting program might make SVG files. If it doesn't, it probably makes PDF files, and then you can open those PDF files in Inkscape. The quality might vary a little bit, but typically it's okay. Okay, so here we are in Inkscape. So this is what happens when we open an Inkscape doc, or when we open Inkscape for fresh. And just as a quick tour, so over here are the tools. There's lots of different tools here. And then when we click on these different tools, you can see that what happens up here, this is the tool control bar, and that changes. So this is really all you need to know. There's the tools here, and then there's the tool control bar that modifies how those tools work. There's also, just as a quick tour, there's colors, of course, down here. I wouldn't worry about this stuff to begin with. So let's just go ahead and open a document. So this is sort of my example. And you can see we're sort of zoomed in too much to our document. So I'm just going to press 5. So this is the first thing. Whenever you're sort of zoomed in some crazy way, you can just press 5, and that takes you so that the whole document is zoomed in to an appropriate amount. And for those who came in late, I wanted to note that all this is written up on a file that you can, on a web page that you can look at afterwards. So you shouldn't have to take too many notes. There are other numbers. If you can press the different numbers, and they'll zoom into different amounts. I don't remember what these things are, but you can start pressing random numbers and see what happens. But 5 is the one that I always use. So now we want to zoom in and out of our document. So you can, there is a specific tool for this. If you're a specific tool kind of person, you can just click in and then shift click out. Click in. You can also take your magnifying glass and draw a little area, and it'll zoom in to that. And then again, we can just press 5. But I'm not really sort of the kind of person that likes to click on a specific tool for zooming in. I'd rather stay with whatever tool I was using before and do my zooming. So this is where the beautiful scrolly wheel comes in. So we can just press Control and then do our scrolly wheel and zoom in and out. And you can see wherever my cursor is, that's where the scrolly wheel is zooming us in and out. Again, 5 to restore. And while you have zoomed in, you can also navigate with Control in the arrows. That will sort of move you around the document. You can, of course, also just use the scroll bars. But that's those are the things that I typically do. I zoom in with the scrolly wheel. I zoom out a little bit. Maybe I press 5, zoom again and again, and then continue. Let's see. Okay, so now we're ready to start. Any questions about moving around the document? Okay, so now we're ready to start selecting objects. So all of these items are called objects. There's a corresponding menu, lots of things we can do with objects. But let's just start by selecting them. So here, I've just selected one. Like many other programs, I can shift click and then select many items at once. I can select. We can also we can also click and drag to select a set of items. So much of this is probably familiar to you. Escape is you can sort of click outside and it'll deselect everything. You can also hit escape. That will deselect everything. Here's one thing that might not be totally obvious and is sometimes handy. You can just press Tab and it'll take you through all the different objects in your document, and then Shift Tab will take you backwards through all the different things in your document. Okay. So now, any questions about that? Selecting things? Pretty straightforward. Now, modifying objects. So as you might expect, there's copy and paste. One potentially annoying thing or a useful thing, depending on your perspective, is when you paste, it pastes it where your cursor happened to be. That's nice. I tend to be a little bit more picky than that. So what I actually end up doing is duplicating things, and then I know exactly where it is, and then I can just move it around using the arrow keys. So we'll get to moving things around a little bit, but the two ways that you duplicate objects are copy and paste, and then just duplicating, which is Control D, or you can get it via the menus. Okay, so that was pretty straightforward. So I'm just going to duplicate this, duplicate an object, and then we're going to play with it. So as you can see, I can just click and drag it around. And there's these little arrows on the outside, and we can use those to resize our object. If you are picky like me, you sort of think, oh, that's sort of ugly. I don't like it like that. So you can hold down Control to keep the aspect ratio. So I hold down Control, and it zooms it in and out. And these guys here just stretch it in one direction or another. Okay, so here's a very useful and a little bit tricky thing. So I've clicked it once, and now I click it again. And you may or may not be able to see, but this arrow type changed a little bit. So this was the original type, and then here's the second click type. And this now has a twisty arrow on it. So now my twisty arrow, I can rotate my objects as I like. The other type of arrow that it has is a skew arrow. So now I can take the skew and I can skew it back and forth. So that is basic modifying objects. And I guess I haven't explicitly said it, but there's infinite undo, and there's also infinite redo. So as for many programs, Control Z undoes, and then you can do Control Shift Z, and that redoes what we had before. So I'm just going to undo back to our very original setup. Okay, so as you can see, there's sort of an order to which some objects are on top of some other objects, and we can control that using these guys up here. So this guy is on the bottom, this triangle, and so I'm going to bump it up one level, and now it's on top of the circle. Bump it up another level, it's on top of this octagon. So if that was too tedious, I can bump it all the way to the top with this button over here. So that's fairly straightforward. Also, these guys over here are useful for rotating things some number of degrees, or you can flip them, and so on. Any questions? Yeah.
Can you bundle like two objects together and rotate them together?
Yes, you absolutely can. Mind if I get to that? It's called grouping, and we'll get to that soon. Okay. But yeah, you absolutely can. Okay, so here's something that's a little bit tricky. So the way that Inkscape objects are composed is there's sort of the shape that is that's filled. So this inside is called the fill, and then there's the stroke, which is the outside. So this is the line that's associated with an object. So when we resize an object, we may or may not want to change the thickness of the line associated with that object. So here I'm going to make this guy bigger, and we can see that when we let go, it returned it to the line thickness to the original thickness of that line. So sometimes we want that. Sometimes we like the thickness of the line at the beginning and we want to keep it. Sometimes we want the image to look exactly the same as it did, except magnified. And so for that, we can click this button up here, and then that is going to modify the line thickness along with the size of the object. So that is a fair, if you have that clicked and you don't want it clicked, that can cause some confusion. These guys you can look at on your own. They're a little bit more complicated about rounded. This is for, we want to scale the rounded edges for rectangles, but we haven't quite gotten to rounded edges for rectangles and things like that. Okay. Any other questions? Right. So that was modifying this beautiful picture that I made for you. But what if you want to draw your own picture? Well, that's what these tools are over here. Like this is probably fairly self-explanatory, except you can see I have a fairly, because I was practicing this, I had a fairly fancy line style. So maybe we can talk about that right now. So so that was a rectangle, but it's got a very thick dotted border. So that's because the stroke setup was to be a dotted border. So let's just go over fill and stroke. So an easy way to get to sort of this fill and stroke, which is the color palette, is to just click down here, which is where you can see the current fill color and the current stroke color. So, okay. So here we've selected an object, and I guess you can see that as we change the selection, it's changing what the current color is. So there's several different ways in which you can specify what colors you want. Personally, I much prefer this. So this is red, green, blue. How much red, how much green, how much blue do we want? I much prefer a hue, saturation, lightness thing where you actually just set what is the actual color I want, how saturated do I want, how light do I want, and this is actually sort of fancy, how opaque do I want it. So let's play with that for a second. So we've got our triangle. We can see it's quite opaque at the moment, but we can scale that opaqueness back and we can get some transparency. So that was for the fill color. We can do the same thing for the stroke color. So we can see, maybe let's make it really red. We can see that it's quite opaque at the moment, and we can scale the opacity of the stroke color as well. Does this feel like maybe I'm getting ahead of people? Fill, stroke, separate, it's okay. There's borders of things. We don't even need to have a fill color at all. So we can turn off the color entirely, and so now we just have a box. So, or we can turn off the stroke entirely, and now we just have a rectangle with no outside. But let's turn that back on because we're about to talk about stroke style. So stroke style, this is how it's what determines the characteristics of the stroke. We can increase the thickness. Let me actually just turn it into a regular line. Okay, we can make things thicker or less thick. We can change the units with which we want to determine things. We can give it sort of a round join or a bevel join. Yeah, we can give it dashes. There's lots and lots of different types of dashes that we can give it. And we can scooch the beginning of the dashing around how we like. Maybe I'll talk about markers and butt edges in just a second. But okay, that was so. we were talking about the square tool. There's also circle tool that's doing things, and like for all these tools. This is sort of freehand, but if you're wanting it to be some sort of convenient multiple of square, then you can hold down Control, and that will make it a nice square circle or whatever it is that you care about. So just so it's not quite so crazy, let's change everything back to okay, yeah. So, and when you're using these colors down here, I'm jumping around a little bit. When you're using these colors down here, just clicking them takes you to the fill. And then if you shift click, that sets, let's see, shift click, that sets the outside boundary. So it sets the stroke. And if we don't want to have a color, we can just click on none. Okay. So there we are. We're making circles, we're making squares. These are quite handy. We can make polygons. And again, if we click on it and then we click the corresponding tool, then we can see in our tool control bar, there's some controls that we can use to control the behavior of this thing. So we can increase the number of sides of our polygon. We can change it into a star. When we have a star, we can do fancy things like give it rounded corners and things like that. So this is sort of quite a nice blob. Okay. So I think that's all quite useful. I don't know who let this tool into the program. Like if you are making a scientific graphic and you're like, this is an amazing tool, just let me know because I'll be really curious. Maybe this is you after too many nights in the lab. I don't know. But I don't personally use Squiggle very much. These other tools are fancy and we'll talk about that in due time. Okay, another thing you can do is you can add bitmap images. So by that, I mean like a JPEG or something like that. So here, let's just copy a picture of an Eppendorf tube. So we can just open that. Oh, that went by a little fast, maybe. Let me just do that one more time. So here we are opening our Eppendorf tube, and it asks, do we want to embed or link the file? And I would strongly suggest that you embed a file, because what happens if you just link the file and then you move that Eppendorf picture somewhere else, then you're going to have a sort of picture missing thing. So just embed that into your image. It'll be a little bit bigger, but that's okay. We all have big hard drives. Okay, so now I have this bitmap picture and I can move it around just like anything else. So now we have our Eppendorf tube.
So that becomes scalable now as well?
No, I wish. I mean, it becomes scalable in some sense, but actually we will make it scalable. It'll become beautiful. Right now it's horrible and rasterized and so on. Okay. So lines. So you'd think lines are quite simple. They're a little bit tricky, but totally great once you get used to them. And was there any other? Oh yeah.
Can you only get a bitmap or can you use JPEG?
Can you what?
Can you use a JPEG?
A JPEG, I would also call. Well, isn't a JPEG a bitmap format? I mean, I guess I mean a pixelated format. So what I mean is like importing something that's not a vector graphic. So.
Referring to the BMP format specifically is the bitmap.
Okay.
Whereas I think the proper way to say is raster images.
Okay, a raster. Okay, well, a pixel-based image, I would say. Okay, so one can import pixel-based images as well. So JPEG and PNG and so on. Thanks for the clarification. Okay, so lines. So this, I clicked on it. This sort of mechanical pencil-looking thing is the line tool. So just for a basic line, we just click and then we click. And if we want to continue, we just sort of keep on clicking. But maybe we don't want to continue. And then we can hit the right button on the mouse and we get our path. So this is why it might feel a little bit tricky. If you just want a simple line, you just click once, twice, but you have to end it by right-clicking. If we want to have a closed path, we can click once, twice, 3 times, and then hopefully you can see that I can hover over, it becomes red, and then now that's a closed path. Okay, so why was it so complicated to make a line? And the reason is if we click and drag and then let go, we get something called the Bezier curve. We get a nice curve, and then we can end that like that. So, and again, to make just a straight line, we just click, click, and then right-click. If we want to make a Bezier curve, or just a curve, I should just call it a curve to make it sound simple. You just draw a line, and then you drag around, click again, and then right-click. So, and then we can do all the different things that we might want to do, changing the color. Okay. So for a long time, I only used this, and now I still often just use the line tool and the Bezier curve. But at one point, I was feeling very bold, and I decided, well, I'm going to start using the pencil tool. So I'm not a good freehand drawer, much less with the mouse, but there is something that's quite handy here, which is this thing up here, which is this amount of smoothing. So let's turn down the smoothing, and you'll see how bad of an artist I really am. So I'm just going to try to draw a droplet. Okay, that's pretty heinous. But if I turn up my smoothing tool, I can actually sort of start with sort of a terrible raindrop, and then I get actually quite a nice raindrop. So that's because I've turned up the smoothing. I mean, you can turn it up to the extreme. Let's see what happens then. I think this is a pretty simple shape, so it'll probably still look okay. But yeah, well, it sort of made it even nicer. So maybe I should always use that level of smoothing. Okay. Right, but I mean, okay, like if I wanted to draw a picture of like a duck, like, okay, that's a pretty bad duck, but smoothing is probably not going to save me because it's going to turn into a raindrop. Yeah, you can't win them all. Okay, so, right. So there's another sort of nice tool here. So far we're just talking about making sort of lines and not areas. So let's say I want to make an area. So one thing I can do is I can use this thing called the paint up tool. So let's select green. Okay, that's sort of quite a vivid green. Let's do a darker green. Okay. So now I take my paint up tool, and it works a lot like a paint up tool you might be used to, except once you get it, you can move it around. Now it is just an object like any other thing. It's not sort of constrained by the shape that we had it before. So that is quite, okay, that looks a little bit easier to manage. Does that make sense? So we actually created an object there. We didn't just fill in the pixels that were in a region. It sort of searched for the pixels in a certain region and then made an object out of that. Okay. So, any questions about that? Okay, so now we can get to the question of can we make this scalable? Which sounds like maybe a hard question to begin with. But what you can do is you can take an image like this and you can trace it and turn it into a nice Inkscape object. So here, trace bitmap image. So we've selected our image and now we're going to trace it. And I suggest if you sort of have reasonable computational power to press live preview. So these are lots of different settings that one can use to trace this. So we can see that the current setting is very bad. You can't see the Eppendorf tube at all. But we can do that. Okay, good. So honestly, like I would love to tell you lots of beautiful theory about which one to pick, but realistically, all I do is I just like click lots of different things. There's not that many combinations, and then eventually you see one that looks good. Okay, so this looks okay. That looks like an Eppendorf tube, and we can change the number of scans, which in this case is going to be the number of colors. So it's a gray image, so let's turn it to grays. And once we're happy with our preview, we can just press OK and move this away. And we can see now we have a very nice sort of image that is the version of like the Inkscape, pure SVG version of our original bitmap image. And it's simplified, and you can change the settings in order to how much you want it simplified.
Can you remind us where that tool was?
So that was, let's see, path trace bitmap. So the reason it's called that is because this is a series of paths now. Okay. So things are going to get a little heavy here, so ask a question now. Okay. Yeah?
I didn't notice is the image associated from its background now. Like, is there still a white box around it?
Oh, is there a white box around it? Yes, there is.
Can I get rid of that?
Yes. Well, this is great. So I will just satisfy both the person who wanted to talk, I think you wanted to talk about grouping. So now I'll talk about ungrouping. So you can see that this is actually a composition of lots of different paths. So if I ungroup, or Control U, you can also go to ungroup. There are lots of different parts of this, some of which are more important than others. So that was that white background, and I've just deleted it. So you can see now there's no white background. Oops, there's no white background anymore. But there is still all these different paths, these different components that make up that shape. So of course, once I've gotten rid of that white background, I probably want to like get everything back into one unit again so I can regroup it. But just for fun, let's take something here, a sort of complicated shape. Yeah, let's just pull this thing apart a little bit. Okay. So I'm gonna pull this apart. Okay. So, and I guess to answer your original question, if you want to rotate a group of a bunch of objects as a unit, I usually group them, click it again, and then I can rotate them how I like. I'll be selling this art after. Okay. So yeah, again, any other questions on this bit? We're going to start talking about control nodes and things are going to get exciting. Yeah.
Group things and scalably recycle as well.
Oh, yes, yes. Oh, and I guess I didn't fully, yeah, maybe I should have said a little bit more about grouping. So, okay, this is a group now, and then I can group this group with something else. Now I can group it, and as you say, I can resize it like I like. And so now it didn't just add this item to this one, it added this item to this group. So now when I ungroup, now I'm back to my original group and the secondary thing that I grouped with, and then I can ungroup again, of course. Makes sense, it's hierarchical, so I group this, I select this, I group this, so this is one group, and then when I ungroup, it maintains the original grouping. This is totally useful.
Can you check the color of one object in the group?
While it's a group?
Just modify one object in the whole group.
You can, but I think it's easiest typically to ungroup something selected and then, but if you don't share the secret, you can sort of multiply click things within a group and then change the colors. And then it's, well, I think maybe we ungrouped it there. Yeah, so that basically ungrouped it when we multiply clicked. So I suggest explicitly ungrouping, selecting something, and changing the properties. Okay. So you guys are ready for control nodes. So for the way that, so when we started, we had lines. And so if we click this and then we click on this second most important tool, it's editing the paths by nodes. And you can see that each of these objects is made up by a collection of nodes. So we can move these nodes around. So you can see this node is blue, it's highlighted, so I can press backspace and actually delete that node. So I can get rid of nodes. If I select two nodes like this, I can add a node like this. So I selected two nodes, I added a node. Oh, see, all of them are selected, but if I can just move this one, I can take sets of nodes and move them around. Okay, so that's just for plain line nodes, but it gets a little bit more complicated. Anybody want to ask a question before it gets more complicated? Okay, so the more complicated part is that when you have these curves, they don't just have nodes associated with them, they have these sort of control points. These control points specify what the sort of the shape of the curve actually is. So this one, because we made it just as a Bezier curve, actually only has one of these control points. But if we select an object like this, there's sort of a lot of these different control points. Let me, okay, so here we are, selected control points. And now I can change the shape by moving around these control points. So you can see that this one is a straight control point. And this one does not, it's not perfectly straight, I don't think. Well, this one certainly isn't straight. So we can see that this, independently, we can move this control point around and this control point around. And that's because it sort of comes to a cusp. We can change the type of the control point up here. So if I don't like that being a cusp and I want it to be one of these straight ones, I can press the button that looks like a straight control node. Alternatively, I can take this one here and I can turn into a cuspoidal one, and now I can move these guys independently. So this is just when I'm feeling very picky. And everything has control nodes. I mean, this is part of it being a scalable vector graphics editor. So see, that thing has a lot. It's all composed of control nodes. And if I'm very picky about how wiggly I want my lines to be, I can go in and change them individually. And there's even all these different arcs. Okay, so continuing the theme, I mean, we go over to our picture here. And this is also composed of control nodes. And if you don't like the way that something was taken from bitmap, so for instance, I don't like this hole, I can go in there and delete that hole. Or I can delete individual nodes. And so sometimes though you don't, like it's incredibly, you want it to be sort of simpler, but it's incredibly tedious to go in by hand and do this. So you can just go to simplify. I mean, I just know it as Control L. I think it's in, oh, it's probably in path. Simplify, Control L. So simplify, 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 simplify. So it's just making it simpler and simpler. And what that actually means, I should have, what that actually means is it's reducing the number of control nodes that are required to describe the object. So we can see now there's just only a few nodes that are required to describe that object. So that's how it quantifies how simple something is. Did you have a question? Nope. Okay. Thumbs up. Okay. So hopefully this was interesting and useful, and not people aren't just sort of falling asleep or back in their chairs or something. Okay, so let's see. Any other questions about control nodes? You can spend way too much time if you are picky doing this. I don't recommend it at all. Okay, so let's just go back. There's a couple more things I wanted to say about fill and stroke. So, so you can see, so here I have something and I kind of want these things to be together, but it's sort of a little bit fiddly, and it's hard to make it look good. So one thing you can do is change the cap, and we can make it into a circular cap. So if each of these three things have a circular cap, it becomes like quite easy to make it look nice. And I think it looks kind of quite pleasing, this butt end. So that's the cap. You can also put arrowheads on things. So that's just what they call these markers. So here we have an arrow, and we've added an arrowhead. We can add, there's actually all sorts of different things. Like for instance, there's one of these, it's a set of legs. You can put legs on your, yeah, well, there's the legs all the way down there. So, and these work as you would expect, like when you move the control nodes around, the arrows move around and so on. Okay. Yeah, I didn't really go. I mean, you can, if you like this sort of configuration for setting the color, you can do this as well. That's nice as well. Okay. Okay, so yeah. So let's talk a little bit about colors. So I have some fairly hideous colors here, and it's nice not to use hideous colors. So for this, there's this project called Color Brewer, which is colors that they developed from map making. And these are amazing, beautiful color palettes. You can go to, if you just search for Color Brewer, you can find them. And somebody in my group a while ago just wrote a little program to put all of the Color Brewer palettes into one SVG file. And this is available on the GitHub page that's linked to from fredhetch.io. And so when you, I mean, I just love these color brewer colors, and I will often, when I'm making something, just copy one of the color brewer palettes into my document. So now I have my color brewer palette, and I can start making things look a lot less ugly. So, and my favorite way of doing that is using this. Let's see, where did it go? It's the dropper tool. It looks like this. This is going to be, I guess it's a little bit, because of the resolution, this is a little bit less convenient than I would like, but okay, well. You said that it's up there.
When you're on that color tab on the right hand side, it shows you the dropper tool.
No. Well, anyway, so you can select your dropper tool, and then now whatever I'm hovering over, it will set that to be the color. So let's ungroup here. So it was setting the color of the entire group. So I'm just going to ungroup, and let's do one at a time. Pick the dropper tool, and now I can set this to be, one of many lovely colors, and they go well together. So I can set this one like this one like this, and overall it looks a lot nicer. If I want to set the stroke, it's just shift and then click. It's a little bit difficult to see, but I'm setting the outside of that. You can see by doing this. Okay, so that's setting the stroke. So that helps us look pretty pro in our figures. Another thing, if you want to look pro, is to use a gradient. I don't know if you want to look this pro, and I rarely do, but you can have a nice gradient like this. And so this is sort of, if you're fading something in. You do see this a lot in fancy journal figures. Like so. And then if I want to go back and edit that gradient, you can move it around and have it be shaped differently.
You add a second color.
You totally can. And this is not something I really do very much. So, but basically the way your gradients work is, you can see that this gradient here is yellow to transparent. You can change this to another color. You can have multiple different gradients. It can get very complicated. Yeah. Okay. So, so now I'm going to talk about lining things up. Another thing, if you're sort of a control freak, you can spend a lot of time doing. So now I have my color brewer palette, and it's just all messed up. So then you can go to align and distribute, and that opens a box with all sorts of different ways that you can align things. I always just use Control-Shift-A, and it's basically always open. You can see actually that these sorts of dialogues that I've opened so far are still there. So this fill and stroke one is still there, and it's just below this align and distribute one now. So that clearly aligned things on a horizontal axis. You can also do things like ask for all of the spaces between things to be aligned. This is maybe not such a good example. So if I have 3 things and I want them to be just all aligned up nicely, I can click on this, and then to fix the spacing between them, I can click on this tool, and that makes it so that they all have equal spacing between them. There are some other things you can do. So for instance, you can select some things, and this randomizes them. If you're not a control freak. So then if you decide to become a control freak again, you can always just sort of line them all back up. Okay, oh yes, so this is actually quite important. So you can see right here, it says relative biggest object. So this is just essential because if we're aligning a small object to a big object and we line them up in the middle, it moves the smaller one. So it doesn't have to be that way. We can move the bigger one. So we align to the smallest object and it moves the bigger object. Lots of different options there. Okay, yeah, here's something sort of fancy and occasionally very useful. We can actually align control nodes. So let's say we are not quite happy with this. This is not quite orderly enough. Like you can see, this node is not in line with the other nodes. We can use this node alignment. So maybe we want all of our control nodes to be in a vertical line, and then we feel happy. Okay. Yeah, so let's talk about, talk about text a little bit. Text basically operates how you would expect. Tasty. So you just click and you start typing. Let's see. So tasty kiwi, and there's just something I wanted to say about alignment. You can see that there's sort of a special alignment tools for aligning these things, and the reason is that our language has these extra bits that hang down. I'm sure they've got a technical name, but if we don't take that into account, this doesn't look very good. The alignment aligns to the very bottom of the letter, but Inkscape understands this, and you can just press the text align button, and it aligns it appropriately. Yeah, of course, you can change fonts up here. You can also make boxes, and this is useful if you have a whole bunch of text, if you're making a poster. I need to make it a little bit bigger. And that wraps it. So now I can just resize this and it wraps the text appropriately. So if you have a bunch of text and you're making a poster, you don't want to have to press return again and do all the line justification yourself. So that's quite useful. Probably you have a font that you really like. I do. This isn't actually it, but you can, it's quite handy to set your default font, and you can just do that with the text and font tool, and you can pick whatever the font is that you especially like, and then you can set that as your default.
Eric?
Yeah?
Do you ungroup a text box while you run individual letters?
No, it won't. It's a text item. But that does remind me of something that's nice to talk about. And there's, if you really want to get crazy with your text alignment, you can change things around with these things. I guess these are called kerns. So we can move things around. We can make them rather strange. And the only reason I actually mention this is because sometimes you'll import a PDF or something and it'll have this weird kerning, and then you can just go to remove manual kerns and then it's back to being normal. Yeah, that's enough rope to hang yourself for sure. Okay. Any other questions?
Can you tweak around the text with gradients, fills, all the rest of it? Can you call out lines on the text to outline individual letters while leaving a fill on the inside?
You can definitely do that. I have not tried gradients, but certainly the fill and the stroke you can change individually. So here I'll set the stroke to be one color and then the fill to be another. And I would imagine, well, should we just try it? Yep, there you go. Maybe I'll start doing that.
Grab open before, can you also modify like the color of different data points or the text?
Yes, yes, this is something that's quite useful. So here we are. Maybe you don't like the position of this. So oftentimes you have to ungroup your plot. And if you have a lot of points, it's going to be quite a big thing. But yeah, you can move these things around. You can move this frame around and so on. I didn't all the way ungroup it.
And I can change the color of one of the data points.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're not scrupulous, you can do all sorts of fancy things. So for instance, we have a null result, and that's somewhat annoying. We might want to have a not null result. So we can use this tool right here. And let's see, hold on. Click this. So not a very good, but holy smokes, look at that correlation. Yeah, wow, that's pretty cool. And now we got to change the legend too. Change that to amazing result. Okay. Right. I don't suggest that, but for doing things like changing the position of y-axis labels, I think that you're in safe territory. Okay.
You're importing like an Excel graph.
I'm sorry, I don't use Excel. Well, but I'm sure you can make a PDF using Excel, and then you can open a PDF and then modify it. So my fingers are crossed for you that works smoothly, but I don't personally use Excel, so I can't say. Many sort of programmatic type, like R, for instance, you can export to SVG. All the Python plotting packages you can export to SVG directly.
I can add to that. I've seen some people export plots, like scatter plots particularly, as either SVG or as PDF when there's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of data points, and that's a bad idea. It's because it keeps track of every one of those data points. It'll take forever to load, it'll take forever to print. Those are when you actually want to export it to be a bitmap or raster, because that would be a finite amount of space.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
How do you change the size of the canvas?
That was the next thing I was going to do. So this box right here is actually sort of, if we were to open this, this is sort of the canvas, as he says, and this is sort of the bounding box of the actual picture. And so this thing out here, this lovely squiggle, is outside, and so nobody will be able to see it. So we need to remedy this. And so it's document properties. And the most useful thing is resize page to content. So, and you should make sure, that nothing is selected, because you don't want to resize the page to the selection. You want to resize it to the drawing. So now, let's see what has happened. Oh, I turned off the page border. Okay, so there we are. So you can see it's resized everything to something that's nice, and so we can fit everything in. These are somewhat handy if you want to have there be a certain size margin. You can put in that margin, and then it leaves that margin on whatever side of things you are. So you can export things. As we were talking about, you can we can print to PDF. You can also export a ping image, which is a bitmap version of this. So I recently had, somebody had made an Inkscape thing on their Windows machine and were having trouble exporting it to PDF. It was not looking very good. But I just want to mention, if you weren't making a poster, you can just export a ping to the resolution of the printer. So the poster printer here is a 300 dpi printer, and it'll look exactly as good as if you had given them a vector graphic. So we can export a ping, and and then we get as good of a graphic as we would have if we had given them a PDF or something like that. Okay. Yeah. Just as a final note, if you give someone an SVG and they don't have the font that it was made, that the SVG was made with, they won't have as nice of a font as you had when you made it. So you can do things like you can convert the text to paths. Let's see. Is that? Well, let's see. I'm not remembering where it is, but oh, I know. We can, yeah. So if we save as, and we want to save the PDF, you can convert text to paths or leave text as just a regular font. So that can be useful if people don't have the corresponding font that you use to make the file. So we're actually about out of time, and I'll take any other questions.
What about sizing? You sized the page to everything that was on it. What if you had made a poster and it's the wrong size? Can you resize the whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, I would just Control A, select all. You could group it if you want, and then press Control to keep the same aspect ratio, and you can size it however you want. Oh, okay, yeah. So basically, right. So what I would do is then I see what you're saying. So you're saying, I want it to be a certain size. So you can set the image size, and then you can just resize it to whatever that is. Yeah.
So I can't chart directly in here, but I can tweak charts or even use it as an intermediary step to get an Excel chart into a format that a journal will accept.
Again, I don't know about importing things with Excel.
Well, like you said, make it a PDF, bring it into here,
yeah.
and then you play around with it.
Yeah. But you certainly, don't add point, and you certainly can't use it as a plotting program. Yeah, it's a vector graphics program.
Do you know if you can import like those geometry plots and equations?
I doubt it. I mean, if you can export them to some other vector graphics format like EPS, then you can import EPS, but not FlowJo directly. Yeah.
I guess I missed it. So how do you rotate an object?
Yeah, so you just click once, so you click twice, and then that's your control.
Can you set the rotation degree digitally?
You are one of these people that, like me, probably spends too much time being precise. I mean, the one thing I know is that if you click Control, it will give you a limited number. I bet there's some way that you can specify the number that you want to rotate it. Okay. Yeah.
And this is at the beginning. How do we get this program?
Yes. You didn't actually really miss it. So this is a good opportunity to say, so if you go to FredHutch.io, looks like, well, my wireless is being a little flaky, but so all the information that